It's time for this week's episode of Brandon Sports Talk, featuring in-depth interviews from those who are trending in the world of athletics. And now, here's the host of Brandon Sports Talk, Brandon Pate.
Welcome back to Brandon Sports Talk. In today's episode, I have the privilege to interview the Syracuse University's Assistant Professor in Sports Economics, Jeremy Losak. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Brandon, for inviting me on.
Thank you. Can you talk about how you knew that you wanted to get started in working in sports education?
Yeah, sure. So my journey was a little unorthodox. I going through kind of my education path, first at Syracuse as an undergraduate, then Clemson as a graduate student, was really around the time that sports data and sports analytics was really kicking off. We're talking about a decade after the whole Moneyball book and the Brad Pitt inspired movie came out in the early 2010s. So data and sport data was just entering the mainstream, and me as a sport management student as an undergraduate, I took to that very quickly. I was definitely always more number oriented, data oriented, stat oriented. So that path really stood out to me. On the other end of the spectrum, my entire family were all teachers, we're all educators. So I always had kind of that baked into me as well. I spent most of my life either tutoring or teaching to some level, or volunteering one-on-one with students. So that's always been a part of my background. So it really kind of meshed together. Getting my PhD, which allowed me to then come back and teach at Syracuse in our sport analytics program, teaching courses in sport econ and sport data analysis.
Of course, as a student, what was that like studying sports management at Syracuse?
Yeah, it was awesome. I going into undergraduate, when I was a high school student looking for a major, I didn't know sport management even existed until I came upon Syracuse's program. And Syracuse is not the only school with a sport management program, but it kind of opened up a lot of eyes to me. It's funny. I think of the freshmen that we bring in every year, and we always ask them the question, what do you want to do what do you want to do for your career? And 95% of them say, I want to be the next great agent, or I want to be the next general manager, right? GM or agent. That's every student walks in saying that. And I was, as a freshman myself, that was certainly my goal. I wanted to be the next, I wanted to be the next Billy Beane, right? The next Theo Epstein. Like those were figures that I seriously looked up to. And that certainly applied to me. And as I went through Syracuse, as I went through our program as an undergraduate, again, I focused on kind of the more quantitative side of sports. But I took courses in sport marketing, sport communications, event management, sales. So I got a pretty holistic view of what the business side of sports looks like, while being heavily engaged in kind of the game ops side as well. So I got a lot of good hands-on experience, whether it be putting together promotional packages for Syracuse softball, whether it be game management for some of our other Olympic sports. I was pretty heavily involved on this, not really our football basketball program, which I know a lot of our students are, but especially the Olympic sports. I got a lot of really nice hands-on experience. But yeah, as I was finishing up Syracuse, I knew I wanted to kind of expand my education, and go to graduate school. And the reason I wanted to go into economics, it's kind of a funny story, kind of a two-piecer. One, when I was a freshman, one of my sport management courses asked me to do kind of a survey, not a physical survey where you email a bunch of people, but look into the backgrounds of some class of individuals that you want to see yourself in their position. I wanted to be a GM, right? That was what freshman me said. So I looked up the educational backgrounds, the career backgrounds at the time of every Major League Baseball general manager, And what I had found at the time was that more than half of them had some background in economics, whether it was undergraduate, advanced degree. There was some econ background. Law was the second most popular kind of background undertaking, but econ was very, very, very heavily represented among those individuals. And that's why I took to economics when I was at Syracuse, and ultimately then why I pursued advanced degree in economics. Now, the other reason I chose economics was as I started taking courses, I realized that that was something that fit my skill set, that fit my strengths. So I definitely clung to econ, which again, by the time I graduated, I didn't go into my PhD thinking, man, I'm going to be a GM, right? Kind of some of those high hopes and dreams that you're talking 1 in a million possibility. You kind of get off the Kool-Aid, so to speak, by the time you finish going to school, and you kind of realize, hey, what's realistic, what's not. So that wasn't necessarily my goal at that point. It was more so, well, I could see myself coming back to teaching. I'm really good with data, and I need a PhD in order to teach at the college level, which is, again, the reason why I went down that route. So that's kind of a mouthful as to kind of how I went in the direction I did, but I certainly am happy with the choices I've made, and I've enjoyed kind of my path going through Syracuse, then grad school, then back here to Syracuse.
Of course, what was that transition like from studying sports management and wanting to become a GM to then becoming a professor in sports econs?
Yeah, it's a great question. And honestly, I mean, I'd be lying to myself and to the listeners, viewers here, if I said I didn't ask myself kind of that question constantly. I've seen kind of the success that some of our students have had in the program. I do ask myself, well, man, how different would life be had I gone to work for a team instead of going down the grad school academia route, right? It's a question I constantly ask myself, because again, a lot of the stuff they do looks really fun. It looks engaging. I mean, it's the type of thing that, again, you go into school hoping to get that job. You want to work for the Yankees, or you want to have that position. You want to be that Jonah Hill character in the Moneyball movie, right? So it, again, for me, a lot of it was opportunity. Knowing that I would have an opportunity to teach data analytics at Syracuse was kind of in the works for a long time, even before I started my PhD program. There was kind of a pipeline there in terms of getting me back here to teach. We as one of your other hosts talked about, kind of our sport analytics program. We're a fairly young program, which has necessitated the need to bring on faculty. And I saw that opportunity and chose a path that allowed me to kind of go down that hole. But it definitely is a transition. You're less focused on answering very, very specific questions that when you work for a team, or when you're working kind of in the professional space, it's essentially rapid fire, question after question after question. You're given a project, they want an answer. You have some task, you have some output that you're trying to produce. In academia, it's a completely different mindset. It's a completely different monster. You have basically free reign to do whatever you want for 5 or 6 years, but at the end of that, you need to show that you've done stuff, and you've developed kind of a research agenda and research profile output that have kind of boost the stature of your program. It's very different. You don't have a lot of 5 o'clock fires, but you have kind of this infinite, let's look down the horizon. Somehow I have to motivate myself to work on something that I theoretically have 4 or 5 years to get done. It's a very different type of mindset that differentiates academics and the professional space.
What was it like for you to be a part of the sports management club?
Yeah, so at Syracuse University, we have a pretty awesome student organization, our sport management club. We have a bunch of student organizations, but the sport management club was one that I was heavily involved in, both as a student and now again as a faculty member. it was a place that brought community, which was awesome, and socialization and different things like that. The club constantly brought in guest speakers, social activities, different things like that. But the big piece to the club that I'm really proud of and I continue to be part of is our sport management charity auction. So every year we pick a charity that serves the central New York community. This year, this actually upcoming charity we're going to work with is an organization called Tilly's Touch. This organization uses soccer to help integrate refugee and minority students into the community. Again, using soccer as a mechanism to boost educational outcomes. So really, really awesome organization. Really excited to work with them. But what our club does is we put on this massive 400, 500 item silent auction in the backcourt of a Syracuse men's basketball game, typically in November or December every year. And we've raised well over, I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but we average about $50,000 raised every year. It's a great experience. The students get to practice all of the skills that relate to sport management. We have sales that sell sponsorships. We have marketing and communications that markets and communicates, or that markets and gets the event out on different platforms and local news and things like that. We have a huge donation apparatus to actually collect auction items. We have a website committee and an inventory committee that handles event logistics. Just recently, because of the pandemic, we moved a lot of we shifted our event to a hybrid format. So rather than just do items in person, we now have an online and in-person component to our auction. We have an analytics arm to our charity event, which is something that I've advocated for and pushed for since my being part of the program. So I would say that's kind of one of the biggest pieces that I really have enjoyed with my time as both a professor and a student at Syracuse is this event, because it's one of the opportunities that we have to kind of give back to the community. To give back to the community using the stuff that's learned in the classroom and getting practical experience in the process. There aren't that many opportunities to do that, to kind of be philanthropic while attaining kind of educational outcomes. But the charity auction has been a huge success in that endeavor. The leaders of the auction are usually the first ones that we have that end up getting jobs, which is kind of a testament to the work, the experience they get and the work they put in. But yeah, the sport management club has been awesome. And we have a bunch of student organizations here on campus that really span the gambit on the sports side. But the sport management club definitely holds a special place in my heart for kind of those philanthropic efforts.
Of course, before becoming a professor, what was it like getting to run a paper and becoming a sports reporter?
Yeah, so that's a great question. There was a period of time when I was an undergraduate, and actually during my early years of grad school, that I was an editor and then editor-in-chief, had MLB reporter, kind of touched on a bunch of roles at a website that doesn't exist anymore, but it was called the sportsquotient.com. We were a collection of college age students across the country that produced analytically driven writing. That was kind of the idea. The reason why it was called the Sports Quotient, our kind of our motto was, we got to raise your SQ, as kind of a play on IQ, right? We wanted to be smart. We wanted to do analysis driven writing. And that was kind of the goal. A little background on that site. There was, at our height, we were averaging a little over 1 million page views a year. And we had definitely got into a point where we were really successful. We were getting a whole bunch of, we were on a whole bunch of email lists and syndicates, getting stuff out. The guy who founded that website is also one of the co-founders of the Overtime Elite League, or Overtime. If you've heard of that company, Zach Weiner, he was the guy who founded the Sports Quotient. So I got to work with him pretty extensively for 5 or 6 years. It was a really good time. as we all kind of as a lot of the leadership, myself included, diverged professionally, the site kind of died down, which is why it ultimately it doesn't exist anymore. But it was a really great opportunity to, one, practice writing, which as a professor now, I cannot tell you how many students struggle to write effectively and communicate effectively, which is one of the most important skills you could possibly have, even in a data-driven role like what I'm training students in on the analytics side. The ability to communicate via the written word is just so important. But it was, anyway, the sports coaching gave a great opportunity for me to practice those skills and force myself to be a better writer and a better communicator, a better editor. I had a managing role, so I got to manage about a dozen editors, which again was really good for my skill development, resume, etc. Skills that definitely carry over even today. And the ability to work with students. It's funny, I worked with college-age students while I was at the Sports Quotient, and I do that now as a professor. So that part of my life certainly has not changed.
Of course, what was it like getting to come at your alma mater and becoming an assistant professor in sports economics?
Yeah, absolutely. So I love Syracuse. I loved my time here as an undergrad. I absolutely love this program, and I could not be more excited to come back. It's been interesting from a sport perspective. So did my PhD down in Clemson, and Clemson Syracuse football. You wouldn't think it'd be a big rivalry, and it's not for anyone besides me. But they've played some really, really, really close, fun games over the last decade, and I've gone to pretty much every single one, road and away, except for the very first one, since Syracuse is in the ACC. So that's been a lot of fun. Like I said, I love it up here. I mean, I don't know how your viewers probably don't know the central New York, upstate New York, central New York region very well. We have the best chicken tenders on the planet at a restaurant chain called Tully's. I'll put Tully's tenders against any tenders in the country. We'll beat them. We got some good food here. Winters are cold. Winters are definitely cold and snowy, but summers here and spring here are absolutely beautiful. So we're at a really nice time of year now. But yeah, I love it. I love it here. It's definitely different being a professor rather than a student in terms of kind of the insight you get and how you run the program. But for me, especially on the analytics side, with our analytics program being so new, it's such a privilege for me to be able to come back and really grow the program. Put my mark on the program, put my mark on all the students that are coming through. It's a huge privilege for me to be able to do that kind of at the place where I started, and help build out what this analytics, especially on the analytics side, what we're doing moving forward.
Of course, what are some of the classes that those prospective students that are taking sports economics are studying?
Yeah, so let me give you a very brief understanding as to what our program looks like. So we are, and this is what happens when you're at a big university, the titles and the nuances of things are just kind of ridiculous at times. So I'm in the sport analytics program in the Department of Sport Management in the David B. Falk College of Sport and Human Dynamics at Syracuse University. So there's layer upon layer upon layer upon layer upon layer to go in there. But focusing kind of at the department level. So I'm in the Department of Sport Management that offers multiple undergraduate majors, sport management being one of them, sport analytics being the other. And launching this fall is a new major in esports. So we'll now have 3 majors coming out of this program. We have multiple minors, a CAS, Certificate of Advanced Study in Sport Analytics, a master's degree in Sport Analytics, a master's degree in Event Management. So again, our department covers a lot. In terms of our analytics students, and since we're focusing kind of on sport econ, the analytics students take 2 sport economics classes. They also take a class on sport data analysis, which is effectively an intro to econometrics. What is econometrics? It is basically statistical techniques to answer economic related questions, or in our case, sport economic related questions. So they take a couple of sport econ classes, some data classes, some statistics classes, some machine learning classes. So coding, there's a lot of coding in our program. So we kind of run the gambit in terms of the types of courses that the students takes, but the kind of the key pillars, so to speak, students that finish our sport analytics program will have a background in economics, will have a background in computer science, will have a background in statistics, a background in communications, especially the ability to communicate data, and then a foreign language. That's a major requirement in our program, is a foreign language, just given the globalization of sports as it exists. To give you kind of a side story on that, one of the very first graduates out of our program, he's been working at the Pirates now for, I'd like to say 3 or 4 years, but the way he got his in with the Pittsburgh Pirates organization was they wanted someone to go down to their complex in the Dominican Republic for scouting purposes. And this student happened to have at Syracuse, he took a number of Spanish classes and became conversational in Spanish. So it was his baseball knowledge combined with his Spanish background, which is why he was able to land that gig with the Pirates. And he's based out of Pittsburgh now, not the DR, but he's been with the Pirates ever since. So the language component is a low-key, super beneficial skill to have in today's sport marketplace.
Of course, what job opportunities do those people have in those sports econs classes?
Yeah, so anybody with sport econ as a background, whether that be sport analytics or whether that be sport management. So our sport management students are also required to take a sport economics class. So anybody with that sport econ background opens up opportunities in terms of definitely game operations. So a lot of the Moneyball, Billy Bean type strategy, trust the process if you're the 76ers, like those type of roles. So the front office roles that everybody wants, you can't have that unless you have some econ, period. You need econ, either econ or a law degree. You need one of those two things if you want to have a job kind of doing front office type work, first and foremost. Econ background really sets, what's interesting about having a kind of background in sport economics is it helps you in almost any profession in sports that you might want. And why is that? Well, the question then becomes, well, what is sport economics? I don't think we've answered that question yet. What is sport economics? Sport economics is, within the framework of sport, it's the understanding of how people behave and what drives individual decision making. Right? Think of a psychology degree, but applied. It's applied psychology in human behavior in sports. So understanding why people do what they do and what drives their decision making. If you want to have a job where you're doing pricing, so ticket pricing, sponsorship pricing, anything involving pricing, you're going to want a sport econ background. Why? Because what's pricing? It's understanding what drives consumer purchasing decisions, right? You set a price that's too low, well, you're leaving money out on the table. You set a price that's too high, you won't fill in those seats, right? So it's identifying kind of that equilibrium pricing point or points, depending on kind of where we go. And it's interesting, in this age of large data, sport econ and kind of the computer science stats background is becoming more and more necessary for a lot of sports jobs. Just because a lot of them are working. Think about Ticketmaster. Think about how much data they collect. And now I know Ticketmaster is the bad guy in a lot of Discord, which I'm not going to disagree. But think about the role that they play in the sports world, right? And again, a lot of that is at a minimum, you have to have some sports econ in your background. You have to understand how pricing works. Think about a completely different type of role or responsibility. Think about you're designing for the NCAA what athlete compensation might eventually look like. You need sport econ in your background in order to be part of that conversation. Revenue sharing. So the ACC just recently announced that they're going to be distributing revenues in part based on performance on the field. That's compared to what they had previously, where every member ACC school received the same same cut from the league. That's a very recent change, but that's all to understand why that matters and why that came into play. That requires an econ background. To give you a very, very simple example, if you've ever been in a fantasy football league and you've always asked yourself, well, dang, why, like, this rule doesn't make any sense, or this incentivizes everyone to behave in ways that we don't want, right? Like, if we have this rule, everyone's going to tank, or a bunch of teams are going to tank, or trade off all their players at the trade deadline, or something weird like that, right? If you ever said, like, hey, this rule doesn't make sense, having an understanding of sport econ allows you to articulate why that's the case. And if you're like me, it allows you to tell your league commissioner, hey, what you're doing makes absolutely no sense. We should do X, Y, and Z. And then your league commissioner scoffs at you because he doesn't like a know-it-all and whatever, right? So I'm going off the rails here, but just to say, sport econ touches on a lot of different areas. Anything that involves policy, anything that involves pricing, anything that involves compensation, it's going to touch on sport econ. So I'm a big champion of having some economics in your background, regardless of what career you go in sports. Heck, coaches should have some sport econ background, because what is game strategy if not understanding what your opponent's going to do if you do X, Y, and Z, right?
Of course, what is that like, obviously, getting to see those prospective students go into the career paths into professional sports?
It really is a pleasure to be able to put students in their dream jobs. I had one student recently. He came in as a freshman and said, I want to work for the New York Jets. And obviously not every student ends up with their career, their dream job, right? Like it's not the the first job out of college for most people is not their dream job, right? But this one student in particular, I was really close to, really, really good guy. And he got an offer, and that he started relatively recently, on a full-time role with the New York Jets. That was his dream job coming in. Just his level of enthusiasm, his mother, who I've gotten to know really well, her level of enthusiasm, like just how excited they were and passionate they were about it, I mean, makes me really, really happy. I will say this. So whenever I have students in class, the thing I say to them, and actually even when they come in as freshmen right away, I tell this to them the very first day of class. I say this. So we all have the same incentives. Your goal is to get a job in sports, right? My goal is to help you get jobs in sports. Why? Because if you get a job in sports, you're going to give me bobbleheads. I have a pretty immense bobblehead collection. So you're going to get me bobbleheads and you're going to get me free tickets. So see, we all have the same incentives here. You want a job, I want you to get a job. And my goal is to get you there. So it's funny, like, I mean, talk about econ, right? Understanding it, like getting incentives aligned and things like that. I will say, whenever a student sends me a bobblehead, it definitely makes me happy. I have probably a 50 to 60 bobbleheads in my collection right now, and it is only just growing. So it really is awesome. But let me say this before I let you ask another question. Not every student gets a job in sports, and that's something to keep in mind. The sport industry is really, really, really competitive. It also doesn't pay very well. The reason it doesn't pay any well, talk about econ again, the reason it doesn't pay very well is because you have a lot of people that want to work in sports. The supply of people is really high, and there's only so many jobs, right? So that's going to suppress wages. So it's a hard field to crack. It's a hard field to get into. One of the things I really like about analytics in our sport analytics program specifically is that even if you don't get a job in sports, you have the same type of skill set, computer science, econ, stats. You have the same kind of skill set that Amazon hires, that Google hires, that Microsoft hires, that most Fortune 500 companies hire. So even if you're not getting a job in sports, there are opportunities outside of sports that use the same skill set that honestly pay more. So that's, I think, one of the really valuable things about what we're able to do here is we're able to provide students with the opportunity to kind of meet their dream, or to kind of realize their dreams. But hey, also once you've kind of grown up a little bit and realize, hey, I want to live this kind of life. I don't want to work 80 hours, 60, 70, 80 hours a week working in sports. Like, I want to have a life. I want to kind of settle down, things like that. There's a lot of practical uses of the degree that you're going to get, especially in our program, when you come here. So not everyone, I'd say maybe half to 2/3 of the students end up in sports, and the other half to a third ends up in a number of other data-driven roles. So I consider that to be fairly successful.
Of course, what job opportunities are available for those people with a sports econ degree?
So someone with a sport econ background, a degree in sport analytics, especially a number of most data-driven roles that will certainly be eligible for, whether that be, again, on the game ops side. Most teams are building out analytics. Most teams over the last decade have built out pretty sizable analytics staffs. So the number of jobs continue to grow. In fact, on the analytics data side, has seen a higher growth rate in jobs compared to any other skill set or area of sport. So data-driven abilities are the hot thing to have right now. To be able to work with large data and things like that, absolutely, absolutely huge. But yeah, all the team ops types jobs, business analytics. The one thing that a lot of teams have really grown out is the capability of analytics staff, or of data-driven individuals to aid in their other processes. Think of sales, for instance, right? The salespeople, analytics has the capability of, one, making you more efficient. We're going to generate leads that are highly likely to purchase versus cold call everybody in the phone in the phone book, right? So we can be a little more efficient. We can price in a way that what we call price discrimination. We get closer to what your willingness to pay is, and we offer different prices based on what we think we can snag you in at. That's a lot of that's data and econ driven. Price discrimination is an economics terminology. If you're talking about marketing or social media, when do you post? Right? You want to get the highest reach. You want to get the most views and clicks and engagements. Well, when should you post that? When should you make that post? What types of posts drive the greatest engagement? What type of posts get the most clicks? What type of posts lead to the most purchases? So, I mean, all of these things, again, are the underlying reason why sports teams operate in social media, is because they ultimately want you to buy stuff. Maybe not with a particular post, but with that engagement, when they do make the ask, they want that sale. And analytics and data and econ play a really pivotal role in making strategic decisions. When do I do this? What type of content are they interested in? How do I evaluate the effectiveness of this content? We haven't talked about agents. Agents are starting to use more and more econ-driven strategies, and data-driven strategies. Sport agencies are just now, they're certainly behind the teams, but they are starting to invest. And then one area of sports that econ and data-driven jobs have exploded is on the betting side. FanDuel, DraftKings, Caesars, or William Hill, just to name a few. These companies, Fanatics is jumping in, purchasing PointsBet. These companies are hiring loads and loads of students. We are sending multiple students to these sports books every year because of the number of kind of econ-driven job related responsibilities that are coming out of these companies. These companies are growing massively as legalization continues to expand, and the job opportunities have only grown equally as exponentially. So a lot of stuff on the sports betting side with this type of background. So you could work almost anywhere in sports with a sport econ background, but there's a lot of kind of really hot areas of sport or hot areas of the industry that have come up very recently.
Of course, what are some of your future plans for the sports econs program moving forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. So where we hope to take the program, we certainly hope to continue to grow our network, grow our relationships, build pipelines with different teams and organizations, create more opportunities for students. In the past few years, we've launched our own case competition where we've actually had, for both football and basketball, case competitions. We've had schools compete virtually with judges from teams, so students can present to judges on some case that they're asked to present. It's usually that is a really, really fun time. So we hope to build that out, that competition component. We hope to build out global immersion trips. So we are working to build relationships with teams in Italy, teams in the UK, to have kind of that global element, add that global element to our program, expose students to the very, very, very raucous world of European football, right? U.S. soccer and soccer, right? So grow out that appreciation. I mean, we have a lot of sports related roles here. Analytics is only going to continue to grow, and data and econ is only going to continue to grow in terms of these European leagues and what they use. And that's going to be ripe for opportunity for students that are willing to make that jump across the pond, so to speak. So those are kind of some of the big things that we're doing here at the program. A lot of it's just doing what we're doing. We were the first, in terms of analytics, we were the first university in the United States to launch a sport analytics undergraduate degree. And a couple of programs have jumped in more recent years, but we are looking to make clear why we are the best analytics program in the country in terms of our job placements, in terms of the education you get here. We are looking to continue to build on make our case to students why we are the best. And that's kind of our driving goal, is to continue to be the best at sport analytics.
Of course, what advice would you give those people that are looking to study sports analytics and sports ecoms?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's interesting. I've seen more and more, especially high school students, jumping in on this early. If you're interested in a quantitative role, the first thing you should do is learn Excel. You should become an aficionado in Microsoft Excel. It's funny, once you actually get a professional job, you almost never use it. Or once you get to a professional level role in sport data, you almost never use Excel. But Excel is kind of that training. It's kind of that building block, right? You have to learn how to crawl before you could walk, before you could stand, before you could walk, before you could run. Well, before you can become a database aficionado using SQL, you should understand how tables work and structure works in Excel. So Excel, that's kind of numero uno. If you can get in on coding, great. In the sport industry, kind of the big coding languages that data analysts typically use are Python. And if you can get some SQL in your background, that'd be great. You don't have to be an expert at it when you're in high school, but just kind of getting yourself exposed to it early is something that more and more high school students are starting to do. And you'll be behind if you're not in that mode, in that mindset. The other thing I would say, kind of the other skill that or the other habit you want to get into is read. There is so much good content online. I'm not talking about kind of your BuzzFeed, soft content, right? I'm not talking about the ESPN fluff pieces that talk about how this player had grit and determination and all those other things that people who don't have psychology degrees claim players to have or not have because some outcome didn't go in their favor, right? I'm not talking about that content. I'm talking about some of the really, really awesome analytical content. If you're a baseball fan, for instance, FanGraphs should be your Bible. Basketball, football, hockey, they all have their awesome blogospheres online. You should be reading everything that you can get your hands on. You should be engaging with people on social media, especially Twitter. There's a very, very vibrant community, especially on Twitter. I don't see too many analytics people doing stuff on TikTok, and there's some stuff on Instagram, but Twitter is usually is the place to be for a lot of this stuff, for kind of this analytic content in the community. So read, engage, start working on your own research. If you have a question, get some data and try to answer it, right? You don't have to be perfect. In fact, most of our students, whenever they do their first project, they're usually pretty bad. But I tell them that because at the end of the day, you can't do good work until you've done some bad work first. You don't know what you don't know until you mess it up, right? You mess it up, you learn from it, you get better. Well, that's what you should be doing now, or that's what you could be doing now is getting your feet wet. Get yourself comfortable with trying to answer questions, and you won't be. Don't get into the habit of thinking, hey, if I do this analysis, I'm going to be solving cancer, right? Like I'm going to be answering this thing that no one's ever been able to answer. Be a little more humble than that, right? Be a little more humble, but understand that by going through the motions, going through the exercises, you're slowly building up your skill set such that when you do get the more advanced background, when you get the tools that you need, skill set that you need, you will be in a lot better position to actually contribute and actually answer these questions in a way that's valuable. So to summarize, read, engage, ask questions, and play around with trying to answer them, even if it's not perfect. That would be my kind of advice to students looking to get into the space are those 4 things.
Of course, what advice would you give those students that are looking to work in sports econs after collegiate studying?
Yeah, so you have to build up your resume. You have to build up your portfolio while you're in college. Nowadays, unless you know someone, unless your uncle's the GM of your team you want to work for, it's really hard to get a job unless you have some experience by the end of your time as an undergrad. And a very easy way to do that is to actually work on your own research. There are a lot of really good forums for undergraduate research in the United States, especially on the data side, where if you could show that you have the ability to answer questions and go through that process, that shows a team or an organization that you have the ability to complete a project, right? Because completing projects believe it or not, is not everyone could do that, right? So showing that you have that background is really valuable. And that's a way you could get experience without needing to trust or rely on the lottery process, internship process getting an internship sometimes feels like winning the lottery. You can't always get that premier internship, but research is something you can certainly do without needing to fulfill any sort of application, right? So that would be part of my recommendation. The other part of my recommendation is get experience when you can, right? If you can get that internship, even if it's with the local minor league team or the local collegiate team or kind of a smaller scale internship. The experience is the biggest piece, right? Because everything's a stepping stone. You're not going to get an intern the first time you apply for internships. You're not going to get an internship with the Yankees, right? You need to go. You need to go through multiple levels of the process before you're even qualified to consider an internship at that level, right? So getting as much experience as you can is absolutely critical. So if you're a student, work on research and do everything you can to get experience. Those are the 2 big things. And also make sure your math is really strong, because math piece to it is, if you're good at math, that's going to help you in this field.
Of course, what advice would you give those people that are looking to work in sports education or even work in sports education?
Yeah, so if you're looking to go the route I did, so if you're looking to, I guess when you say sport education, there's a couple of different branches that falls under, right? Coaching might be considered sport education, or if you're working at the high school level and you're running an athletic department, that's a little different than what I do. I teach at the university level, sport management, sport analytics, sport econ based classes. If you're looking to do what I do, well, you have to have a PhD, first and foremost. You will not get to this level without it. How do you get it? What PhDs are relevant? So my background's I have a PhD in economics. I did all my research in sport economics. So that was my foray in. There are PhDs in sport management. There are PhDs in sport recreation and tourism. depending again what area you want to specialize in. But yeah, if your goal is to follow a similar path as me, you will need to get that advanced degree. You also need to be research focused. You need to be, most university professors, especially at research heavy institutions, are going to expect you to do research. In fact, I'd say more than half my job is doing research, even though our conversation has been very kind of student focused. A lot of my job is research. So if you want to be in kind of education on academia on the sports side, you'll need that. And again, you could always go the sport communication route. That degree, if you want to work in sport communications, you need a combination of advanced degree and practical experience, right? You can't just get a degree in communications and teach sport communications. No, you need to be somebody who's been in the industry and understands the industry. People of practice on that side are critical, right? So yeah, again, there's a lot. Sport education covers a number of different kind of paths, but if you want to go my path, that the next step would be kind of master's then PhD, right? So getting all those fancy titles at the end of your name, right? That's the way you kind of have to progress in that route.
That's great advice. Where can my listeners find your contact at?
Sure. Well, if you go to, there's a few places. So you could follow me on Twitter at, I believe my Twitter is just my name, but I can go ahead and confirm that. Yeah, it's just Jeremy Losak, no space. I post things occasionally on Twitter. That's again my main place of social media-ness. More information on me professionally, my contact information, my email, things like that. You can get it at our university's website. If you go to falk.syr.edu, go to the college directory, go to sport management, you can find my information there. I'm always interested in engaging with students. So if you are interested, please reach out via email, Twitter, LinkedIn messaging. All of those work really well. So if you find yourself at a Sabre Analytics conference, I'm a frequent attendee of that conference. So that's always a fun time. If you're looking to get into baseball data and baseball analytics, that's a must-go annual conference in Arizona. But yeah, that'd be how to reach me.
Thank you again, Jeremy Losak, for your interview, and best luck in your future as the Assistant Professor of Sports Econ.
Thank you for having me, Brandon.
You can find Brandon Sports Talk on Instagram at Brandon Sports Talk, Twitter at Talk_Brandon, and you can find me on YouTube at Brandon Sports Talk. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you again, Jeremy Losak, for your interview, and best luck in your future.
Thank you.
You've been watching Brandon Sports Talk. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to Brandon Sports Talk on social media and on YouTube.